Hello, welcome to the Daily Faded. My name is Hetz, and this is where we get faded daily and talk about the politics and news of the day. So, why don't you get faded with me? Have a toke, take a drink, have a sip of milk, whatever it is you like. The Republican, excuse me, the Republican National Convention, night 2. Boy, oh boy, oh boy. Today's August 25th, 2020, and I didn't plug my mic in. Hold on one second. That's the problem with watching the Republican National Convention is I have to smoke while I'm watching it because that's the only way to make it through. And then I'm stoned when I set up my shit. Thank you for sticking with us through technical difficulties. Well, before I get into the Republican National Convention, let's do a little catch up on the numbers on COVID-19. Today, the world went past 24 million cases confirmed of COVID-19. Obviously, the number is many multiples higher than that, but that is the confirmed case count, and the confirmed death count is 822,000, with 5,809 deaths being reported today. In the US, we're almost at 6 million cases, 39,000 new cases today, which, look, that's a much lower number than what we were dealing with a couple weeks ago. So that's good news. We're at 182,357,000 deaths as of today, with 1,243 deaths today. And here in California, we've got 682,000 confirmed cases, which means we've had more cases in California than in any other state, with 5,817 new cases today, 130 new deaths today in California from coronavirus, bringing us to a total of 12,387 deaths in California. So here's what I'm thinking when it comes to COVID-19 and what's going on for our country right now. One school district after another seems to be popping up into the news with stories of people testing positive for COVID-19 and schools needing to quarantine students, schools needing to close down. So many colleges and universities that wanted to do some kind of in-person schooling ended up doing distance learning because they couldn't make it work. And there are schools going back to school all over the country after Labor Day. And that's going to increase the number of cases. I think by the middle of September or the third week of September, we'll see those case numbers going up. And then there will be a corresponding wave of deaths about a month later. That puts that towards the end of October. So I think that's what we're looking at. I think we've got another little bit of a trough here that we're getting into right now, although not with the death toll. The death toll is 1,200 today. Our trough on the death toll was around 500 deaths a day back in July. Early July, late June, maybe. But I don't see it. I don't see it going well, and there's no reason to expect that we won't have a lot more cases and all of the resultant consequences of cases when we open schools and send kids back to schools. Which again will also show how stupid Trump was for pushing schools to reopen. All of which seems politically like political liabilities to Trump, if you ask me. But what do I know about political liabilities? Just saw this today. per Harvard and a Fed researcher, the number of Americans suffering permanent job loss is between 6.2 million and 8.7 million. 6.2 million to 8.7 permanent jobs killed. That's super hard to come back from. That's super hard to come back from. And look at all the small businesses that have been destroyed by this economy. Look at all the people who weren't saved by PPP loans. Look at all of the businesses that are forever changed, that will never be the same again. Restaurants in cities may never be back to 100% capacity that they were at before the pandemic. It may never happen. All of that is massive reduction in the economy. And the economy, as it was not able to afford everyone enough money that they could live on what they earned or what they had. So the economy was already failing. Far too many Americans, millions and millions of Americans, tens of millions of Americans who live below the poverty line, tens of millions of Americans who can't afford the health insurance that they have, tens of millions of Americans who pay far too much of their take home to pay their rent. Which is why I'm a big supporter of universal basic income. And there was a great article in New Scientist. Universal basic income seems to improve employment and well-being. The world's most robust study of universal basic income has concluded that it boosts recipients' mental and financial well-being, as well as modestly improving employment. Finland ran a 2-year universal basic income study in 2017 and 2018, during which the government gave 200 unemployed people aged between 2,000 unemployed people aged between 25 and 58 monthly payments with no strings attached. The payments of 560 euros per month weren't means tested and were unconditional, so they weren't reduced if an individual got a job or later had a pay raise. The study was nationwide, and selected recipients were able to opt out because the test was written into legislation. Look, I think a UBI that guarantees every citizen the bare minimum of food and housing, along with guaranteed healthcare and guaranteed education for everyone, if you put those 4 things together, then you're starting to talk about a society that is taken care of, a society where no one slips through the cracks. You know, it's amazing because they keep saying at the Republican National Convention about how Donald Trump is, going to take care of Americans, going to take care of everyone. But the examples they use are always right-wing tropes, so it's pretty clear they don't want to take care of, Jacob Blake. It's pretty clear they don't want to take care of, McDonald's workers who are fighting for $15 an hour. Anyway, sorry. Back to the UBI. The study compared the employment and well-being of basic income recipients against a control group of 173,000 people who were on unemployment benefits. There was a greater increase in employment for people in families with children, as well as those whose first language wasn't Finnish or Swedish, but the researchers aren't yet sure why. When surveyed, people who received universal basic income instead of regular unemployment benefits reported better financial well-being, mental health, and cognitive functioning, as well as higher levels of confidence in the future. This notion of mental well-being, I'm going to butcher it. I don't know the quote, but in essence, Karl Marx said that having all your needs met is where you start with freedom. That freedom is having all your needs met and being able to know that all of your needs are met. I just completely butchered whatever the quote was that he said, but I heard about it. I heard this in a lecture by a Marxist professor recently. Freedom from worry. I think that's what he said. Freedom from worry. See that? I'm a little stoned when I do this. So it takes me a while to remember the actual quote. I'm doing my best. What can I tell you, people? Hold on one moment. I'm going to have a special guest on the program next Monday night. I'm very excited about it. So make sure you're tuned in. So now moving on to the RNC. There's been plenty of news the last couple of days, but I'm dining out on the RNC just because I don't know why. One of the things that I find amazing about the RNC, like one of the things about the DNC is there weren't a lot of people lying, you know? I noticed a few canards here and there in the DNC, but it wasn't like one person after another came out telling lie after lie after lie. And these people are all willing to lie on a national stage to maintain their place in the Trumpist world. I mean, they're all grifters. They're all grifters, you know, and that goes for Nikki Haley and Tim Scott yesterday too, because they lie about Trump's record. They lie about his work ethic. They lie about his honesty. SV Date, who asked Trump, SV Date is the HuffPost reporter who asked Trump how he feels about having told so many lies in his 3.5 years as president, and Trump just ignored him. Could not process, could not deal. But they're all willing to lie, and they're all willing to engage in mass delusion together. And I mean, maybe the waters are warm. I know when I've tripped in the past, I always enjoyed tripping more if someone was tripping with me. You know what I'm saying? But yeah, these people are engaging in mass delusion. And it also occurs to me that every time Trump or his acolytes talk about how great things were before the pandemic, it's like they're telling you to completely disregard the failure of leadership since February. It's this, I don't know, linguistic game that they're playing to whitewash, to do that other thing, gaslight, to gaslight. Every time they talk about how amazing the economy was, they're trying to keep you from thinking about how bad the economy is. It's remarkable to watch. It's remarkable to watch. And yet, with all the delusion and all the lying and all the madness that is represented on the screen with the RNC each night, I really feel like Trumpism is here to stay, at least for a generation after Trump. You know, I would hope that the next Republican president after Trump is somehow sane, technocratically capable, and, you know, not a psychotic death cult president. But that doesn't seem very likely. But I think Trumpism is here to stay. I think there are some people who've had a taste of dear leader authoritarianism, and they like it. They like it. They like, you know, it's like the woman at the Steve Bannon event who said, "I never thought I'd want a dictator in America, but if I have to have a dictator, I want it to be Donald Trump." Those were prophetic words, because Donald Trump bends everything to his will as president. The full accounting of all the laws that Donald Trump broke, the full accounting of all the evil Donald Trump did while he was in office, will be written by historians. But there will still be people who passionately want to believe that Trump is the greatest president of all time. And the reason they want to believe that is because Trump has been selling it to them. And they've bought it. They've bought the myth that Trump is the greatest president of all time. They've bought all of Trump's lies. And when you add all of Trump's lies up, you get Trump is the great American hero. And that's not going away because I think it makes people feel good. You know, there are a lot of people who, I don't know, they're insecure about their patriotism. I don't know what the fuck I don't know what their problem is. But the Reagan type, the Trump type, that big authoritarian, you know, with hair. Anyway, so some of those people are going to be around, and we'll be seeing Trump flags and Trump stickers and MAGA hats, at least for a generation. And I only hope that they get deactivated out of the Republican coalition so that we don't get something like Tom Cotton as the next Republican president, which is what scares me, you know, or Sean Hannity or Tucker Carlson, you know, who knows? RNC night 2. So they're billing tonight as the night of America, the land of opportunity, but not coronavirus, because they hardly talked about coronavirus at all. When Melania Trump actually brought it up, I was kind of shocked, and that was all the way at the end of the night. Of course, there were mentions of it, but very little acknowledgement, and absolutely no sense of the personal loss and grief that the nation has gone through because of coronavirus. Think about the amount of loss and grief this nation went through after 9/11. And how many 9/11s have happened since this pandemic started? You know, I've lost count of how many 9/11s it is. I've lost count of how many Vietnams it is. All of these sources of great national trauma, and so many more dead bodies from coronavirus than from these other great national traumas. And they just don't talk about it at the Republican National Convention. They opened with a big shtick on criminal justice reform, and they had this activist, John Ponder, there, who runs an organization called Hope for Prisoners, which is about getting formerly incarcerated people back into the world, back into the workplace, back into their communities, back into their families, that sort of thing. And this guy, John Ponder, was sent to prison for something. I wasn't paying full attention. And it was his third strike, and he was going to get a long sentence, but the judge gave him a short sentence, and he thanked God and decided to devote himself to God. And so there was a lot of talk about God. And Ponder was talking a lot about how the cops are not his enemy. You know, and they're talking about really caring about fighting for former inmates. And it's like, you're the same party that re-enfranchised formerly incarcerated people in Florida. And you cheered when Ron DeSantis did that. So there's a little bit of hypocrisy with Trump, as will come as no surprise to anyone. And then there's something about, like, when I think about formerly incarcerated people, which is actually a very big issue for me. I think criminal justice reform is hugely important, but I also think carceral reform is really important because, you know, when you're doing time, you're being taken out of society and you're being forced into, you know, you're being forced to stay in one place and not interact with society. To me, that's the punishment. This idea that you should be subject to violence, murder, rape, that you have to suffer and you have to pay and you know, be in solitary for your entire time because you're fearing for your life in your regular cell. I mean, I worry a lot about these issues. But all these guys talked about was God. Like, if you just find God, you're going to be fine getting back into the world after you've been incarcerated. But all that said, John Ponder seems like a perfectly nice fellow, and I wish the best for him. And then Trump pardoned him. So Trump's really using the White House as a big fucking prop for this Republican National Convention. A little later on, he actually naturalized some brand new citizens. So that was more of, hey, let's watch Trump do his job at the White House. Let's see, we got some time from Rand Paul, who talked about Trump supporting his eye surgery trips to Guatemala and Haiti before he was president. I never heard that before. I'm surprised the check cashed. Talked about, mostly Rand Paul talked about the First Step Act and pointed out that Trump had signed criminal justice reform that had failed before Trump, and that's true. And Trump gets some small amount of credit for the First Step Act. He later said he regretted signing it, and I don't give him personal credit. But you know, and it's also a very small, it's a very, very much a first step. There's a lot more work that needs to be done in legislation. But Rand Paul also talked about, you know, Trump is the first president since Reagan not to start a new war. Talked about Trump wanting to end wars, said Trump's going to bring the troops home from Afghanistan, which, you know, right now there are basically the same amount of troops there as when Trump took office, maybe a few thousand less, but we still got troops there and we're still killing people there. So let's stop killing people there and stop letting people die there, and let's bring our troops back home. But Rand Paul, he quoted Madison, who talked about continuous war not being good for the country, which I agree with. You know, the one thing Rand Paul is right about is that we should not be getting into foreign wars. He's not even right about everything on foreign policy, but I agree with him there. You know, and he hit Biden hard on his traditional foreign policy and how much of a hawk he's been and how he's supported, you know, every war for the last 30 years. Rand Paul seems like a kook most of the time, but he's felt extremely sane and down to earth compared to last night's speakers. And then we got some more of workers, a lobster fisherman, a Wisconsin dairy farmer, a ranching family, yada, yada. Praise Trump. And then professional wrong guy Larry Kudlow came out and just said a bunch of shit that's not true. He said that Trump inherited a stagnant economy on the front end of recession. That is blatantly untrue. There's zero evidence to suggest that. There's no evidence that we were on the edge of a recession. I can give you all kinds of problems with Obama's economy, but by all the same metrics that Donald Trump uses, Obama's economy was stronger than Trump's. By GDP, well, GDP always goes up, so not by GDP, but by the number of jobs created. Anyway, it's Larry Kudlow just lies. He said that we became the world's #1 producer of energy under Trump. That happened under Obama. Blah, blah, blah. Rising tide lifts all boats. And then the pandemic happened. This is just what I was telling you about, how they want to skip over the pandemic and pretend like, oh, this thing happened and it's no big deal and everything's going to get back to normal. And then he starts talking about the V-shaped recovery and 20% growth in the second half of the year. Has this man not heard about consumer spending plummeting since the $600 a week ended? Is he not paying attention to his own economic indicators? This is no time for a $4 trillion tax hike, Larry Kudlow says. I'm pretty sure Joe Biden is not calling for a $4 trillion tax hike. I'm not sure how they claim they came up with that number. But suffice it to say, Larry Kudlow has been wrong on so many things that if he says there's going to be a V-shaped recovery, you could be guaranteed there will not be a V-shaped recovery. So do not bet on that. I'm going to skip over some of the other people and jump to Pam Bondi. They brought Pam Bondi, former AG of Florida, out to talk about Joe Biden's corruption and Hunter Biden. And she laid into all the normal targets, Burisma and Ukraine, which I think is a fair target because Hunter Biden got that job because his name is Biden. Clear and simple. And it, you know, is probably not an ethical thing to do when you're the son of the vice president who has that country in his portfolio. It's really probably not ethically the right thing to do. But that said, there's no indication that anything illegal happened, and it's just the same kind of grift that Trump does all over the world. So pot kettle black kind of thing. You know what I'm saying? Whenever I cough, that means I have to smoke some more. She talked a mean game about China and Hunter Biden getting money from China and how that money came straight from the Chinese Communist Party, and Biden is owned by the Chinese. This woman took campaign donations from Donald Trump when she was running for Attorney General in Florida, and then dropped out of the multi-state lawsuit against Trump University for defrauding students of the education that they were paying for. So for this woman to say that Joe Biden is corrupt when her corruption is legend, oh my God, it's just a perfect representation of what the RNC is all about, the level of hypocrisy. And all that said, there was no indication of cocaine with Pam Bondi. So I have to give her high marks. I don't mind Kimberly Guilfoyle riding the rails for her speech, or, Donald Trump Jr. Doing the Bolivian monorail. But, and then we get to Tiffany Trump. I don't have much to say about Tiffany Trump. Looked like a college Republican performance of the small order. She laid out the things that we believe in, they believe in, and they were all just platitudes like, we believe in the First Amendment, we believe in owning guns, we believe in... And then she says, if you're hearing these things and thinking to yourself, that is the kind of country I'd want to live in, well, whether you realize it or not, you're a Trump supporter. That is going to turn exactly 0 people onto Donald Trump. And then she told a lot of lies. Oh boy, oh boy. I'm going to skip over some more here. I'm skipping Eric Trump because he was terrible. He was terrible. Talked about Trump is going to send Americans to Mars. Look, the thing about tonight is that it's not quite as batshit crazy as yesterday. There's still plenty of talk about the radical left and plenty of fear-mongering about a possible Biden administration. But it wasn't as batshit crazy, in part because no Kimberly Guilfoyle and no Donald Trump Jr. But it was also just not as interesting. I mean, Mike Pence and Eric Trump and Melania, when we get to Melania, oh my God. Mike Pompeo spoke from a trip abroad. Before I get to Mike Pompeo, I saw a tweet regarding Mike Pompeo doing this. Caitlin Collins tweeted, Colin Powell in 2004 on refusing to attend the Republican convention. Quote, as Secretary of State, I am obliged not to participate in any way, shape, fashion, or form in parochial political debates. I have to take no sides in the matter. That is what a Secretary of State should do. And I'm not the biggest fan of Colin Powell, but I agree with him there. And I do think Mike Pompeo delivering this address was completely inappropriate. He went on a very predictable speech about Americans being safer because of Donald Trump's leadership overseas, and some comment about how, our allies don't always like what Donald has to say, but he always tells the hard truth to the world. And, he saved us in North Korea, and he saved us from China, and he saved us from Iran, and NATO is stronger, which is not true. NATO is most definitely weaker. He talks about how he killed Soleimani, even though that was against international law. That was an act of war. Trump beat ISIS, he said, even though ISIS was pretty much beat when Trump took office. Trump saved us from Iran. These people think Trump has a good record on foreign policy when his record on foreign policy is abysmal. It's absolutely abysmal. And Mike Pompeo talked about Trump keeping peace for the United States and keeping American life peaceful. Donald Trump accelerated the bombing in ISIS and razed cities in Syria to the ground and killed untold numbers of civilians in Syria. He increased drone strikes according to 1%, but according to one report, he increased drone strikes by 470%. And previous reporting has indicated that our drone program is killing something like 90% innocent people in our drone strikes. So Donald Trump has made the world a much more dangerous place, and there are more troops in the Middle East today than when he took office, in part because he's moved so many troops to like Qatar and UAE and all of those places where we have bases in the anti-Iran coalition. So yeah, Mike Pompeo was weak, and he just comes across as a thug. You know, he just looks like a thug, and he talks like a thug, and just not compelling. So it's like one speaker after another: Tiffany Trump, Eric Trump, Mike Pompeo, and then Melania Trump. Well, first, so Melania speaking in the Rose Garden, and they've got quite a crowd assembled. Let's say half social distancing. The seats weren't right next to each other, but they were clearly too close. And there were very few people with masks, although it was dark, so there might have been more with masks. But again, I just think it's completely inappropriate for a president to use the White House as a campaign aid, you think? You know, there's no doubt that White House staffers have been pulled into the process of planning for this. There's no doubt that White House resources have been used to political ends, and that is wrong. But Trump doesn't care about the rules, and there's nobody out to enforce the rules. So we get what we get. So Trump comes out to the crowd in the Rose Garden and stands up there and applauds himself. And then he sits down, and Melania does the long walk down the colonnade, very much pageant-like. And she actually said something that kind of surprised me, which was she said, "I want to acknowledge the fact that since March, our lives have changed." And she talked about people who are ill or suffering, people who are anxious or feeling helpless in the pandemic, and then claimed that Trump will never stop fighting for them, which of course is ridiculous because Trump hasn't been fighting for them. So that's where it kind of went off the rails. And I got to tell you, she's like a character out of Zoolander. Like if you were making a Zoolander sequel where Zoolander goes to the White House, this would be the first lady in a Zoolander movie. Can I just tell you that Melania Trump was terrible? She's terrible. The speech, she phoned it in. She talked about the 19th Amendment. She talked about growing up in Slovenia. She painted herself as the picture of a good immigrant. She talked about kind of how she did everything right as an immigrant, as opposed to all those people who do it wrong. She talked about how coming to America, she wanted to make sure that she contributed to American society. So she came and bilked a billionaire for his money. How is that contributing to American society? She talked about Be Best, which I didn't even know that was still a thing. I think they just trot it out every 4 years for the convention, and then it's Be Best to not ask about Be Best. At one point she said it's a privilege to live here. And I thought, lady, it's not a privilege. You're a citizen. It's your right to live here. I'm a citizen. It's my right to live here. They like to take our rights and make them privileges, For Republicans and for Democrats, getting healthcare is a privilege, not a right. That's why we say healthcare is a human right. But look, the bottom line on Melania is that she was weak. And tonight was, you know, it wasn't as bombastic as last night, but it also wasn't as good as last night, which is not saying much because last night was terrible. Again, it's just amazing how much lying is going on. And people were not lying at the Democratic National Convention. I will give the Democrats credit for that. They were at least telling the truth, because, in large part because they weren't talking about policy. So when you're not talking about policy and you say Donald Trump is a threat to democracy, you're telling the truth. At least the truth as you see it. That's it for tonight, folks. This has been the Daily Faded. Please make sure you hit subscribe, like, and notify, and I will be back tomorrow at 8 o'clock with more RNC nonsense. Peace out. Thanks a lot.